So there's a lot of work going on in the background. And I think from a news point of view, it'll be a busy sort of next sort of 3.5 months towards the end of the year.
Today, we'll be diving into the story of Magnis Energy Technologies. Magnis Energy have recently just kickstarted into full production at their lithium-ion battery asset in the United States, iM3NY. It is a major milestone. They're the only ASX listed company to provide exposure to lithium-ion battery production. Of course, that's not the complete part of their story. They've got their leading Nachu Graphite asset as well, and longer term aspirations as well in the battery manufacturing space. It's a fascinating story. We're welcoming back to the channel the chairman of Magnis Energy, Frank Poullas. Frank, welcome back.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on.
There is so much for us to unpack. I know many people have been really fascinated to hear about how things are going. Before we dive into all of that, let's just reflect a little bit. iM3NY into production now. You must be excited. How's everything going?
Yeah, look, it's really exciting for us. It's been years in the making for the company. And it is, a bit of a sense of relief, I would say. But yeah, very exciting about the next stage of growth for the business. And we're looking at scaling up production exponentially, quickly. So it's exciting times for Magnis and its shareholders.
For sure. I think obviously on the ASX, a lot of people are very familiar with the lithium companies producing the actual lithium itself and the mining, but there's not a lot of exposure to the actual lithium battery cell production. Can you give a bit of an insight into what you're doing at iM3NY, the size of 3 football fields, production's ramped up, really fueled by clean energy as well, which is important. What is the actual offering there?
So as you mentioned, it's a really large factory that we have over in New York, in a place called Huron campus in Endicott, New York. Huron was previously the birthplace of IBM. So we have a large factory that IBM previously used for the manufacture of semiconductors and circuit boards. So it is made for high-tech manufacturing. We have our battery plant based out of one of the factories in Huron campus. And as you mentioned, is powered by clean energy. We're using hydro power from upstate New York. So it's really exciting. And what we do in there, we're producing the cells. So when you look at, for instance, if we used a electric vehicle, for instance, and we produce the cells, like the batteries that go into a battery pack, which then has a bit of software that goes onto it called the battery management system. So we're producing those cells that go into these packs.
For sure. And just to give a bit of an insight there, obviously you've got a broad range of customers, but I think predominantly you're focused on the energy stationary storage component. Can you give us an insight into the mix of that and how the demand is really looking at the moment?
Absolutely. The majority of our clients to date are in the energy stationary storage side of the marketplace. In saying that, we are in a number of programs with a number of different OEMs in the auto space, purely because there's obviously a huge need in the marketplace now for cells. And we believe our battery technology, our cathode, which is known as BMLMP, bodes really well for the auto space as well. And as we're sort of seeing now, when you look at, if we use Tesla as an example, 40% of their cell that are produced for their cars but using LFP technology. So there's sort of that groups looking at, moving away from the nickel and cobalt based technologies. And I think that's purely more from a cost advantage point of view and from a safety point of view as well. So I think the market's sort of, moving towards our direction. And I feel like, the stars are aligning at the moment.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear that. And obviously, as we know, the initial scale up is going to be commencing. You're looking to get towards 1.8 gigawatt hours moving forward. I think that's 15,000 cells a day. So no small feat. Can you talk about what investors should look towards as you move towards those first revenues and then from there outwards as well?
So for what investors should see in the marketplace, I think there's just going to be a constant ramp up. We've set to market, we're looking at 38 gigawatt hours by 2030. Our plans internally are a bit more bullish than that as well, but all you'll see is a constant ramp up, not only up to 1.8 gigawatt hours, but then, to 5 and so on. We're looking at building in 4 gigawatt hour blocks to get to the 38 gigawatt hours. But all I see in the coming years is just like a constant ramp up period that will just continue on. And it's really exciting. There's obviously a lot of demand in the marketplace for cells, as everyone's probably aware of, not only from comments made by the raw material producers, but we're seeing it also from the end customers. There is just such a huge demand. And the beauty of what we have in the US is it's the only homegrown battery plant using US technology. So there's no other battery plant in the US using US technology. And when you look at some of the government programs that are out there at the moment, like the Inflation Reduction Act that was released recently, apart from groups like ourselves receiving tax credits of $35 per kilowatt hour of production, there's even incentives there for the OEMs, but they need to use 80% of their of the equipment to produce their product from US suppliers. So being able to do that and provide that to these OEMs all bodes really well for us going forward.
38 gigawatt hours, that's definitely no small feat. Are you able to, I guess, just paint that context of viewers who might not be as familiar with just the type of scale that is? And also on the ground, obviously, you're having lots of discussions with stakeholders throughout the supply chain. What are people really thinking about this electrification and clean energy trend, and how is it really evolving?
Yeah, look, I think the difference where we from now to probably last sort of waves of the whole electrification sort of adoption and transition, when you've got, I suppose, large governments who are supporting the movement and the transition, I think that's a difference this time around. And in the US especially, there is a lot of sort of government funding that's out there, and there are a number of programs to support and help and encourage that transition to take place. And that's what we're seeing right now. And we're receiving a lot of support, not just from a monetary point of view, but even like I mentioned around the power, using sort of clean energy, where we've got it at a very cheap rate, our power usage in New York. And there's a lot of other aspects, like even the building in Huron campus. So we've been receiving a lot of support, and we also see monetary contributions coming soon in the form of potential loans and grants from the US government as well, which we've applied for, and we've had really good feedback on as well. So there's huge growth there, as we're aware of, but even from end users that we've and OEMs that are approaching us, it seems that this time around this transition is has a full steam ahead, and this is going to be really exciting for a group like iM3 going forward.
Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned, it really looks like the tide is starting to turn fairly rapidly. Inflation Reduction Act, $300 billion plus, really earmarked for that climate change side. Love to know, obviously, you've talked about it there. There's the potential of funding and loans from the government. Any key catalysts that investors should look for on that front? Or is it just a case of as the opportunities come through, they'll be aware of those?
So we've applied for a loan with the Department of Energy and their loans program. So we're hopefully fingers crossed we'll be successful there, and that could be something that investors could look forward to. And then there's a couple of those programs, as you mentioned. There was around the infrastructure program, or the Build Back Better program, that there's grants there around the cell manufacturing side. So we're quietly confident there. As you mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently announced, there's a few details around there, as I mentioned, around $35 per kilowatt hour of production starting 1st of January 2023, and I think that's for about 6 years. There's a couple of these programs we've applied for that we feel like we qualify for, and we're hopefully we'll be hearing more news between now and the end of this year.
Yeah, sure. And then just to round out the discussion surrounding the lithium-ion battery manufacturing, obviously there's a Townsville opportunity as well. A lot of the focus has been on iM3NY just because it's rapidly ramping up. But can you give any insight into what's happening on Townsville and what investors should keep an ear out for?
So our plan was always to get New York up and running and use that as a sort of basis to, replicate something locally in Australia. We are speaking to all stakeholders, and we are passionate about getting a battery plant up and running in Australia. Hopefully we'll have more news in the near future, and as it comes to hand, we'll obviously keep our shareholders informed with any developments there.
And then flowing through, I guess, to the graphite side, the exciting Nachu project. For those viewers who might not be familiar, can you first give that insight into Nachu, what you've got on your hand there, and then where we're currently at? Obviously, the feasibility study is currently being reworked with it.
So yeah, the Nachu project's really exciting for us. It's something that the company has as one of its sort of main projects. The sort of where we differentiate with others is that we can produce a battery grade anode material with mechanical processes only. So no chemical acid type purification, no thermal purification either. And we can produce that anode product at a 99.95% purity, and we've produced at 99.98% purity. So mechanical processes only. What that would mean, I think, would be the greenest product in the marketplace, seeing we're not using any harsh chemicals, and also from a cost point of view, should be the cheapest in the marketplace as well. Now, we've started our initial infrastructure works on site. So we've started some of the dams that will need to store water for the construction period. Our BFS has taken a bit longer than expected, and that's just purely that work's being done by Senco. As we all know, there's labour and staff shortages, and especially around engineers in the marketplace. We expect, though, it will be completed this month. And the team at Senco has been trying their best to get it done as quick as possible, but they have some, shortages and a number of projects that are online at the moment. So once that comes through, we'll be busy in looking at funding the project. We've spoken to a number of groups around the funding aspect. And everyone's waiting for this BFS to come out before we progress that side of the business. So it's a large project. From a resource point of view, it's got a 40-year mine life at producing over 200,000 tonnes of concentrate per annum. We're looking at 220,000 tonnes of concentrate per annum, and that purification bit and being able to bypass it, I believe is a game changer for that project and is the differentiator for us versus other projects in the marketplace.
Perfect. Obviously, there's a few different contingencies and things that still need to fall into place. But did you have any high-level potential timelines about pathways towards construction yet?
So from our side, we still see sort of a build of about 21 months to get into production. We still think it is feasible for us to get into production by the end of 2024. We are working hard towards that, hence why we've kicked off some of the sort of infrastructure pieces like the dams and so on early on to make sure that we can hit our goals and the time frame, and we are sort of investigating sort of other aspects around the downstream that investors can look forward to in the near future, but for the time being, it's all around Nachu and just producing that concentrate for now.
Phenomenal. I know that obviously it's been an exciting past period, but it's taken 6-7 years really to get to this point. It's been scattered throughout the conversation, but I'd just love to ask you, what's it actually been like getting up to this stage? And really, what's your outlook for the lithium battery space, particularly as you're so embedded within the supply chains now?
Look, as you mentioned, it's taken us a while to get to where we got to. So sort of from inception of, coming up with the idea, putting a feasibility study together or internal scoping study, it's been about 6 to 7 years. And even speaking with the government over in the US and on the New York project, it's roughly been sort of from that aspect about 6 years. So it hasn't sort of been an overnight success. It's taken a lot of work to get to where we've got to. Uh, it, just on the US itself, I think there's obviously that big push to produce a lot of these, raw materials, the downstream products in the US, to producing cells, to sort of creating that integrated supply chain in the US. So we're seeing a lot of growth, a lot of the end users of products coming to us and looking at, for us to supply them with cells. We're seeing that big push from the government flowing all the way down to those end customers. So I think the US market is one that's been overlooked, and I think we may have spoken about that in our last conversation. But I think right now it's sort of front and center, and that's, I see as the market that sort of has a lot of growth coming into it, and I think we're in the right place at the right time.
Definitely looks like you're well positioned to ride the excitement coming through. Love to know, as we head into the final quarter of 2022, what are those key catalysts investors should continue to watch for just over a quarter to go that really Magnis will continue to try and deliver on to?
I suppose the revenue starting in that last quarter, and then just that gradual ramp up period. We're working towards, as we mentioned, government funding as well for the New York Battery Plant, and helping that to increase the production rates and going towards that double-digit gigawatt hour production rate. Obviously, you need that funding to get there, and that's what we're working towards right now. And then on the mining side, the BFS or DFS being completed by sort of the end of this month, and working towards funding towards the later part of the year. They're probably the major catalysts. We also see off-takers coming in as well, so increasing sort of that order book, and hopefully working on some of those who are more in the EV space and sort of those larger OEMs. So there's a lot of work going on in the background, and I think from a news point of view, it'll be a busy sort of next sort of 3.5 months towards the end of the year.
There's a lot of moving parts, a lot going on in the Magnis Energy Technology story. I'd love just to hear any final reflections you had, perhaps for those longer term shareholders who have followed the journey, or prospective holders who are now just learning about Magnis Energy.
Look, I think from the longer term shareholders, a lot of what they've been hearing over the years is finally coming into fruition. With revenue starting to kick off in the coming, months and quarters. I feel it's a really unique space, as you mentioned initially. From an ASX point of view, we're the only cell manufacturer or someone who's involved in cell manufacturing, I think, who's even looking at future cell manufacturing as well. So it's really unique. I see that the marketplace is moving towards integrated battery plays. So you look at, from the Teslas to the Cattles or CATLs of the world, they're taking interest in mines, getting involved in the process, trying to reduce the cost of producing their batteries. And that's something, and the vision that we had many, many years ago, and we're there at the moment. So I feel like if we can execute correctly in the US, from not only from a production point of view, but scaling up exponentially quickly, I feel that it could be a huge company maker. And if we could just do it right in the US, I think this company has a lot of growth going forward.
That is the Magnis Energy Technology story. It's ASX M&S, also listed OTC MNSEF. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. Feel free to share it out, and make sure you've subscribed with your bell notifications on. Frank Poullas, thanks for joining us. Look forward to catching up again, and congratulations on a great milestone.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate you having us on again.